Chapter 11. The ghost has attained the southernmost point of the arc she is describing across the Pacific and is already beginning to edge away to the west and north towards some lone island, it is rumored, where she will fill her water casks before proceeding to the season's hunt along the coast of Japan. The hunters have experimented and practiced with their rifles and shotguns till they are satisfied, and the boat pullers and steerers have made their sprit sails, bound the oars and rowlocks in leather and sennit so that they will make no noise when creeping on the seals, and put their boats in apple pie order, to use Leach's homely phrase. His arm, by the way, has healed nicely, though the scar will remain all his life. Thomas Mugridge lives in mortal fear of him and is afraid to venture on deck after dark. There are 2 or 3 standing quarrels in the forecastle. Lewis tells me that the gossip of the sailors finds its way aft, and that 2 of the telltales have been badly beaten by their mates. He shakes his head dubiously over the outlook for the man Johnson, who is boat puller in the same boat with him. Johnson has been guilty of speaking his mind too freely and has collided 2 or 3 times with Wolf Larsen over the pronunciation of his name. Johansen he thrashed on the amidships deck the other night, since which time the mate has called him by his proper name. But of course it is out of the question that Johnson should thrash Wolf Larsen. Lewis has also given me additional information about Death Larsen, which tallies with the captain's brief description. We may expect to meet Death Larsen on the Japan coast. And look out for squalls, is Lewis's prophecy, for they hate one another like the wolf whelps they are. Death Larsen is in command of the only sealing steamer in the fleet, the Macedonia, which carries 14 boats, whereas the rest of the schooners carry only 6. There is wild talk of cannon aboard and of strange raids and expeditions she may make, ranging from opium smuggling into the States and arms smuggling into China to blackburning and open piracy. Yet I cannot but believe, for I have never yet caught him in a lie, while he has a cyclopedic knowledge of sealing and the men of the sealing fleets. As it is forward and in the galley, so it is in the steerage and aft on this veritable hell ship. Men fight and struggle ferociously for one another's lives. The hunters are looking for a shooting scrape at any moment between Smoke and Henderson, whose old quarrel has not healed, while Wolf Larsen says positively that he will kill the survivor of the affair if such an affair comes off. He frankly states that the position he takes is based on no moral grounds, that all the hunters could kill and eat one another so far as he is concerned, were it not that he needs them alive for the hunting. If they will only hold their hands until the season is over, he promises them a royal carnival when all grudges can be settled, and the survivors may toss the non-survivors overboard and arrange a story as to how the missing men were lost at sea. I think even the hunters are appalled at his cold-bloodedness. Wicked men though they may be, they are certainly very much afraid of him. Thomas Mugridge is cur-like in his subjection to me, while I go about in secret dread of him. He is the courage of fear, a strange thing I know well myself, and at any moment it may master the fear and impel him to the taking of my life. My knee is much better, though it often aches for long periods, and the stiffness is gradually leaving the arm which Wolf Larsen squeezed. Otherwise I am in splendid condition, feel that I am in splendid condition. My muscles are growing harder and increasing in size. My hands, however, are a spectacle for grief. They have a parboiled appearance, are afflicted with hangnails, while the nails are broken and discolored, and the edges of the quick seem to be assuming a fungal sort of growth. Also, I am suffering from boils due to diet, most likely for I was never afflicted in this manner before. I was amused a couple of evenings back by seeing Wolf Larsen reading the Bible, a copy of which, after the futile search for one at the beginning of the voyage, had been found in the dead mate's sea chest. I wondered what Wolf Larsen could get from it, and he read aloud to me from Ecclesiastes. I could imagine he was speaking the thoughts of his own mind as he read to me, and his voice, reverberating deeply and mournfully in the confined cabin, charmed and held me. He may be uneducated, but he certainly knows how to express the significance of the written word. I can hear him now, as I shall always hear him, the primal melancholy vibrant in his voice, as he read, I gathered me also silver and gold, and the peculiar treasure of kings and of the provinces. I gat me men singers and women singers, and the delights of the sons of men as musical instruments, and that of all sorts. So I was great, and increased more than all were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom returned with me. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. All things come alike to all. There is one event to the righteous and to the wicked, to the good and to the clean and to the unclean, to him that sacrificeth, and to him that sacrificeth not. As is the good, so is the sinner, and he that sweareth, as he that feareth an oath. This is an evil among all things that are done under the sun, that there is one event unto all. Yea, also the heart of the sons of men is full of evil, and madness is in their heart while they live, and after that they go to the dead. For to him that is joined to all the living there is hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything, neither have they any more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Also their love, and their hatred, and their envy is now perished, neither have they more a portion forever in anything that is done under the sun. There you have it, Humph, he said, closing the book upon his finger and looking up at me. The preacher, who was king over Israel in Jerusalem, thought as I think. You call me a pessimist? Is not this pessimism of the blackest? All is vanity and vexation of spirit. There is no profit under the sun. There is one event unto all, to the fool and the wise, the clean and the unclean, the sinner and the saint, and that event is death, and an evil thing, he says. For the preacher loved life, and did not want to die, saying, for a living thing is better than a dead lion. He preferred vanity and vexation to the silence and unmovableness of the grave. And so I. To crawl is piggish, but to not crawl, to be as the clod and rock, is loathsome to contemplate. It is loathsome to the life that is in me, the very essence of which is movement, the power of movement, and the consciousness of the power of movement. Life itself is unsatisfaction, but to look ahead to death is greater unsatisfaction. You are worse off than Omar, I said. He, at least, after the customary agonizing of youth, found content and made of his materialism a joyous thing. Who was Omar? Wolf Larsen asked. I did no more work that day, nor the next, nor the next. In his random reading, he had never chanced upon the Rubaiyat, and it was to him like a great find of treasure. Much I remembered, possibly 2/3 of the quatrains, and I managed to piece out the remainder without difficulty. We talked for hours over single stanzas, and I found him reading into them a wall of regret and a rebellion which, for the life of me, I could not discover myself. Possibly I recited with certain joyous lilt, which was my own, for his memory was good, and at a second rendering, very often the first, he made a quatrain his own. He recited the same lines and invested them with an unrest and passionate revolt that was well nigh convincing. I was interested as to which quatrain he would like best, and was not surprised when he hit upon the one born of an instant's irritability and quite at variance with the Parisian's complacent philosophy and genial code of life. What, without asking, hither hurried whence, and without asking, whither hurried hence? Oh, many a cup of this forbidden wine must drown the memory of that insolence. Great, Wolf Larsen cried. Great, that's the keynote, insolence. He could not have used a better word. In vain I objected and denied. He deluged me, overwhelmed me with argument. It's not the nature of life to be otherwise. Life, when it knows that it must cease living, will always rebel. It cannot help itself. The preacher found life and the works of life all a vanity and vexation, an evil thing. But death, the ceasing to be able to be vain and vexed, he found an eviler thing. Through chapter after chapter he is worried by the one event that cometh to all alike. So Omar, so I, so you, so even you, for you rebelled against dying when Cookie sharpened a knife for you. You are afraid to die. The life that was in you, that composes you, that is greater than you, did not want to die. You have talked of the instinct of immortality. I talk of the instinct of life, which is to live, and which, when death looms near and large, masters the instinct so-called of immortality. It is mastered in you, you cannot deny it, because a crazy Cockney cook sharpened a knife. You are afraid of him by now. You are afraid of me. You can't deny it. If I should catch you by the throat, thus, his hand was about my throat and my breath was shut off, and began to press the life out of you, thus, and thus your instinct of immortality will go glimmering, and your instinct of life, which is longing for life, will flutter up, and you will struggle to save yourself, eh? I see the fear of death in your eyes. You beat the air with your arms. You exert all your puny strength to struggle to live. Your hand is clutching my arm. Lightly it feels as a butterfly resting there. Your chest is heaving, your tongue protruding, your skin turning dark, your eyes swimming. To live! To live! To live! You are crying. And you are crying to live here and now, not hereafter. You doubt your immortality, eh? Ha! Ha! You are not sure of it. You won't chance it. This life only you are certain is real. Ah, it is growing dark and darker. It is the darkness of death, the ceasing to be, the ceasing to feel, the ceasing to move, that is gathering about you, descending upon you, rising around you. Your eyes are becoming set. They are glazing. My voice sounds faint and far. You cannot see my face. And still you struggle in my grip. You kick with your legs. Your body draws itself up in knots like a snake's. Your chest heaves and strains. To live, to live, to live. I heard no more. Consciousness was blotted out by the darkness he had so graphically described, and when I came to myself I was lying on the floor, and he was smoking a cigar and regarding me thoughtfully with that old familiar light of curiosity in his eyes. Well, have I convinced you? He demanded. Here, take a drink of this. I want to ask you some questions. I rolled my head negatively on the floor. Your arguments are too forcible, I managed to articulate, at cost of great pain to my aching throat. You'll be all right in half an hour, he assured me, and I promise I won't use any more physical demonstrations. Get up now. You can sit on a chair. And, toy that I was of this monster, the discussion of Omar and the preacher was resumed, and half the night we sat up over it. Chapter 12. The last 24 hours have witnessed a carnival of brutality. From cabin to forecastle, it seems to have broken out like a contagion. I scarcely know where to begin. Wolf Larsen was really the cause of it. The relations among the men, strained and made tense by feuds, quarrels, and grudges, were in a state of unstable equilibrium, and evil passions flared up in flame like prairie grass. Thomas Mugridge is a sneak, a spy, an informer. He has been attempting to curry favor and reinstate himself in the good graces of the captain by carrying tales of the men forward. He it was, I know, that carried some of Johnson's hasty talk to Wolf Larsen. Johnson, it seems, bought a suit of oilskins from the slop chest and found them to be of greatly inferior quality, nor was he slow in advertising the fact. The slop chest is a sort of miniature dry goods store which is carried by all sealing schooners and which is stocked with articles peculiar to the needs of the sailors. Whatever a sailor purchases is taken from his subsequent earnings on the sealing grounds, for as it is with the hunters, so it is with the boat pullers and steerers. In the place of wages, they receive a, quote, lay, end quote, a rate of so much per skin for every skin captured in their particular boat. But of Johnson's grumbling at the slop chest I knew nothing, so that what I witnessed came with a shock of sudden surprise. I had just finished sweeping the cabin and had been inveigled by Wolf Larsen into a discussion of Hamlet, his favorite Shakespearean character, when Johansen descended the companion stairs, followed by Johnson. The latter's cap came off the custom of the sea, and he stood respectfully in the center of the cabin, swaying heavily and uneasily to the roll of the schooner and facing the captain. "Shut down the doors and draw the slide," Wolf Larsen said to me. As I obeyed, I noticed an anxious light come into Johnson's eyes, but I did not dream of its cause. I did not dream of what was to occur until it did occur, but he knew from the very first what was coming and awaited it bravely. And in this action I found complete refutation of all Wolf Larsen's materialism. The sailor Johnson was swayed by idea, by principle and truth and sincerity. He was right. He knew he was right, and he was unafraid. He would die for the right if needs be. He would be true to himself, sincere with his soul. And in this was portrayed the victory of the spirit over the flesh, the indomitability and moral grandeur of the soul that knows no restriction and rises above time and space and matter with a surety and invincibleness born of nothing else than eternity and immortality. But to return, I noticed the anxious light in Johnson's eyes, but mistook it for the native shyness and embarrassment of the man. The mate, Johansen, stood away several feet to the side of him, and fully 3 yards in front of him sat Wolf Larsen on one of the pivotal cabin chairs. An appreciable pause fell after I had closed the doors and drawn the slide, a pause that must have lasted fully a minute. It was broken by Wolf Larsen. "Janssen," he began. My name is Johnson, sir, the sailor boldly corrected. Well, Johnson, then, damn you. Can you guess why I have sent for you? Yes and no, sir, was the slow reply. My work is done well. The mate knows that and you know it, sir, so there cannot be any complaint. And that is all? Wolf Larsen queried, his voice soft and low and purring. I know you have it in for me, Johnson continued with his unalterable and ponderous slowness. You do not like me. You... Go on, Wolf Larsen prompted. Don't be afraid of my feelings. I'm not afraid, the sailor retorted, a slight, angry flush rising through his sunburn. If I speak not fast, it is because I have not been from the old country as long as you. You do not like me because I am too much of a man. That is why, sir. You are too much of a man for the ship's discipline, if that's what you mean, and if you know what I mean, was Wolf Larsen's retort. I know English, and I know what you mean, sir, Johnson answered, his flush deepening at the slur on his knowledge of the English language. Johnson, Wolf Larsen said, with an air of dismissing all that had gone before his introductory to the main business at hand. I understand you're not quite satisfied with those oilskins. No, I'm not. They are no good, sir. And you've been shooting off your mouth about them. I say what I think, sir, the sailor answered courageously, not failing at the same time in ship courtesy, which demanded that, quote, sir, end quote, be appended to each speech he made. It was at this moment that I chanced to glance at Johansen. His big fists were clenching and unclenching, and his face was positively fiendish. So malignantly did he look at Johnson. I noticed a black discoloration still faintly visible under Johnson's eye, a mark of the thrashing he had received a few nights before from the sailor. For the first time I began to divine that something terrible was about to be enacted. What? I could not imagine. Do you know what happens to men who say what you said about my slop chest and me? Wolf Larsen was demanding. I know, sir, was the answer. What? Wolf Larsen demanded, sharply and imperatively. What you and the mate there are going to do to me, sir. Look at him, Hump, Wolf Larsen said to me. Look at this bit of animated dust, this aggregation of matter that moves and breathes and defies me and thoroughly believes itself to be compounded of something good, that is impressed with certain human fictions such as righteousness and honesty, and that will live up to them in spite of all personal discomfort and menaces. What do you think of him, Hump? What do you think of him? I think that he is a better man than you are, I answered, impelled somehow with a desire to draw myself upon a portion of the wrath I felt was about to break upon his head. His human fictions, as you choose to call them, make for nobility and manhood. You have no fictions, no dreams, no ideals. You are a pauper. He nodded his head with a savage pleasantness. Quite true, Hump, quite true. I have no fictions that make for nobility and manhood. A living dog is better than a dead lion, say I, with the preacher. My only doctrine is the doctrine of expediency, and it makes for surviving. This bit of the ferment we call Johnson, when he is no longer a bit of the ferment, only dust and ashes, will have no more nobility than any dust and ashes, while I shall still be alive and roaring. Do you know what I'm going to do? He questioned. I shook my head. Well, I am going to exercise my prerogative of roaring and show you how fares nobility. Watch me. 3 yards away from Johnson he was, sitting down. 9 feet. And yet he left the chair in full leap, without first gaining a standing position. He left the chair just as he sat in it, squarely, springing from the sitting posture like a wild animal, a tiger, and like a tiger covered the intervening space. It was an avalanche of fury that Johnson strove vainly to fend off. He threw one arm down to protect the stomach, the other arm up to protect the head, but Wolf Larsen's fist drove midway between on the chest, with a crushing, resounding impact. Johnson's breath, suddenly expelled, shot from his mouth, as suddenly checked with the forced, audible expiration of a man wielding an axe. He almost fell backwards and swayed from side to side in an effort to recover his balance. I cannot give the further particulars of the horrible scene that followed. It was too revolting. It turns me sick even now when I think of it. Johnson fought bravely enough, but he was no match for Wolf Larsen, much less for Wolf Larsen and the mate. It was frightful. I had not imagined a human being could endure so much and still live and struggle on. And struggle on Johnson did. Of course there was no hope for him, not the slightest. And he knew it as well as I. But by the manhood that was in him, he could not cease from fighting for that manhood. It was too much for me to witness. I felt that I should lose my mind, and I ran up the companion stairs to open the door and escape on deck. But Wolf Larsen, leaving his victim for the moment, and with one of his tremendous springs, gained my side and flung me into the far corner of the cabin. "The phenomena of life, Hump," he girded at me. "Stay and watch it. You may gather data on the immortality of the soul. Besides, you know, we can't hurt Johnson's soul. It's only the fleeting form we may demolish." It seemed centuries. Possibly it was no more than 10 minutes that the beating continued. Wolf Larsen and Johansen were all about the poor fellow. They struck him with their fists, kicked him with their heavy shoes, knocked him down, and dragged him to his feet to knock him down again. His eyes were blinded so that he could not see, and the blood running from ears and nose and mouth turned the cabin into a shambles. When he could no longer rise, they still continued to beat and kick him where he lay. "Easy, Johansen, easy as she goes," Wolf Larsen finally said. But the beast in the mate was up and rampant, and Wolf Larsen was compelled to brush him away with a backhanded sweep of the arm, gentle enough, apparently, but which hurled Johansen back like a cork, driving his head against the wall with a crash. He fell to the floor, half stunned for the moment, breathing heavily, and blinking his eyes in a stupid sort of way. "Jerk, open the doors. Hump," I was commanded. I obeyed, and the two brutes picked up the senseless man like a sack of rubbish and hove him clear up the companion stairs, through the narrow doorway, and out on deck. The blood from his nose gushed in a scarlet stream over the feet of the helmsman, who was none other than Lewis, his boatmate. But Lewis took and gave, spoke and gazed imperturbably into the binnacle. Not so with the conduct of George Leach, the erstwhile cabin boy. Fore and aft there was nothing that could have surprised us more than his consequent behavior. He it was that came up on the poop without orders and dragged Johnson forward, where he set about dressing his wounds as well he could, making him comfortable. Johnson, was unrecognizable, and not only that, for his features, as human features at all, were unrecognizable, so discolored and swollen had they become in the few minutes which had elapsed between the beginning of the beating and the dragging forward of the body. But of Leach's behavior, by the time I had finished cleansing the cabin, he had taken care of Johnson. I had come up on deck for a breath of fresh air and to try to get some repose for my overwrought nerves. Wolf Larsen was smoking a cigar and examining the patent log, which the ghost usually towed astern, but which had been hauled in for some purpose. Suddenly Leach's voice came to my ears. It was tense and hoarse with an overmastering rage. I turned and saw him standing just beneath the break of the poop on the port side of the galley. His face was convulsed and white. His eyes were flashing, his clenched fists raised overhead. May God damn your soul to hell, Wolf Larsen. Only hell's too good for you, you coward, you murderer, you pig, was his opening salutation. I was thunderstruck. I looked for his instant annihilation. But it was not Wolf Larsen's whim to annihilate him. He sauntered slowly forward to the break of the poop, and, leaning his elbow on the corner of the cabin, gazed down thoughtfully and curiously at the excited boy. And the boy indicted Wolf Larsen as he had never been indicted before. The sailors assembled in a fearful group just outside the forecastle scuttle and watched and listened. The hunters piled pell-mell out of the steerage. But as Leach's tirade continued, I saw that there was no levity in their faces. Even they were frightened, not at the boy's terrible words, but at his terrible audacity. It did not seem possible that any living creature could thus beard Wolf Larsen in his teeth. I know for myself that I was shocked into admiration of the boy, and I saw in him the splendid invincibleness of immortality rising above the flesh and the fears of the flesh, as in the prophets of old, to condemn unrighteousness. And such condemnation, he hailed forth Wolf Larsen's soul naked to the scorn of men. He rained upon it curses from God in high heaven, and withered it with the heat of invective that savored of a medieval excommunication of the Catholic Church. He ran the gamut of denunciation, rising to the heights of wrath that were sublime and almost godlike, and from sheer exhaustion, sinking in the vilest and most indecent abuse. His rage was a madness. His hips were flecked with a soapy froth, and sometimes he choked and gurgled and became inarticulate. And through it all, calm and impassive, leaning on his elbow and gazing down, Wolf Larsen seemed lost in great curiosity. This wild stirring of yeasty life, this terrific revolt and defiance of matter that moved, perplexed, and interested him. Each moment I looked, and everybody looked, for him to leap upon the boy and destroy him. But it was not his whim. His cigar went out, and he continued to gaze silently and curiously. Leach had worked himself into an ecstasy of important rage. "Pig! Pig! Pig!" he was reiterating at the top of his lungs. "Why don't you come down and kill me, you murderer? You can do it. I ain't afraid. There's no one to stop you. Damn sight better and out of your reach than alive and in your clutches. Come on, you coward. Kill me! Kill me! Kill me!" It was at this stage that Thomas Mugridge's erratic soul brought him into the scene. He had been listening at the galley door, but he now came out, ostensibly to fling some scraps over the side, but obviously to see the killing he was certain would take place. He smirked greasily up into the face of Wolf Larsen, who seemed not to see him. But the Cockney was unabashed, though mad, stark mad. He turned to Leach, saying, "Such language! Shocking!" Leach's rage was no longer impotent. Here at last was something ready to hand. And for the first time since the stabbing, the Cockney had appeared outside the galley without his knife. The words had barely left his mouth when he was knocked down by Leach. 3 times he struggled to his feet, striving to gain the galley, and each time was knocked down. "Oh, Lord," he cried. "Help, help, help! Take him away, can't you? Take him away!" The hunters laughed from sheer relief. Tragedy had dwindled. The farce had begun. The sailors now crowded boldly aft, grinning and shuffling, to watch the pummeling of the hated Cockney. And even I felt great joy surge up within me. I confess that I delighted in this beating Leach was giving to Thomas Mugridge, though it was as terrible, almost, as the one Mugridge had caused to be given to Johnson. But the expression of Wolf Larsen's face never changed. He did not change his position either, but continued to gaze down with a great curiosity. For all his pragmatic certitude, it seemed as if he watched the play and movement of life in hope of discovering something more about it, of discerning in its maddest writhings a something which had hitherto escaped him, the key to its mystery, as it were, which would make all clear and plain. But the beating! It was quite similar to the one I had witnessed in the cabin. The Cockney strove in vain to protect himself from the infuriated boy, and in vain he strove to gain the shelter of the cabin. He rolled toward it, groveled toward it, fell toward it when he was knocked down. But blow followed blow with bewildering rapidity. He was knocked about like a shuttlecock until, finally, like Johnson, he was beaten and kicked as he lay helpless on the deck, and no one interfered. Leach could not have killed him, but having evidently filled the measure of his vengeance, he drew away from his prostrate foe, who was whimpering and wailing in a puppyish sort of way, and walked forward. But these two affairs were only the opening events of the day's program. In the afternoon, Smoke and Henderson fell foul of each other, and a full shade of shots came up from the steerage, followed by a stampede of the other 4 hunters for the deck. A column of thick, acrid smoke, the kind always made by black powder, was arising through the open companionway, and down through it leaped Wolf Larsen. The sound of blows and scuffling came to our ears. Both men were wounded, and he was thrashing them both for having disobeyed his orders and crippled themselves in advance of the herding season. In fact, they were badly wounded, and having thrashed them, he proceeded to operate upon them in rough surgical fashion and to dress their wounds. I served as assistant, which he probed and cleansed the passages made by the bullets, and I saw the 2 men endure his crude surgery without anesthetics and with no more to uphold them than a stiff tumbler of whiskey. Then, in the first dog watch, trouble came to a head in the forecastle. It took its rise out of the tittle-tattle and tale-bearing which had been the cause of Johnson's beating, and from the nose we heard, and from the sight of the bruised men next day, it was patent that half the forecastle had soundly drubbed the other half. The second dog watch and the day were wound up by a fight between Johansen and the lean, Yankee-looking hunter, Latimer. It was caused by remarks of Latimer's concerning the noises made by the mate in his sleep, and though Johansen was whipped, he kept the steerage awake for the rest of the night while he blissfully slumbered and fought the fight over and over again. As for myself, I was oppressed with nightmare. The day had been like some horrible dream. Brutality had followed brutality, and flaming passions and cold-blooded cruelty had driven men to seek one another's lives, and to strive to hurt, and maim, and destroy. My nerves were shocked. My mind itself was shocked. All my days had been passed in comparative ignorance of the animality of man. In fact, I had known life only in its intellectual phases. Brutality I had experienced, but it was the brutality of intellect, the cutting sarcasm of Charlie Feruseth, the cruel epigrams and occasional harsh witticisms of the fellows at the Bible lot, and the nasty remarks of some of the professors during my undergraduate days. That was all. But that men should wreak their anger on others by the bruising of the flesh and the letting of blood was something strangely and fearfully new to me. Not for nothing had I been called Sissy Van Wyden, I thought as I tossed restlessly on my bunk between one nightmare and another. And it seemed to me that my innocence of the realities of life had been complete indeed. I laughed bitterly to myself, and seemed to find in Wolf Larsen's forbidding philosophy a more adequate explanation of life than I found in my own. And I was frightened when I became conscious of the trend of my thought, the continual brutality around me that was degenerative in its effect. It bid fair to destroy for me all that was best and brightest in life. My reason dictated that the beating Thomas Mugridge had received was an ill thing, and yet for the life of me I could not prevent my soul joying in it. And even while I was oppressed by the enormity of my sin, for sin it was, I chuckled with an insane delight. I was no longer Humphrey Van Wyden. I was Hump, cabin boy on the schooner Ghost. Wolf Larsen was my captain. Thomas Mugridge and the rest were my companions, and I was receiving repeated impresses from the die which had stamped them all. Chapter 13. For 3 days I did my own work and Thomas Mugridge's too, and I flatter myself that I did his work well. I know that it won Wolf Larsen's approval, while the sailors beamed with satisfaction during the brief time my regime lasted. "The first clean bite since I come aboard," Harrison said to me at the galley door as he returned the dinner posts and pans from the forecastle. "Somehow Tommy's grub tastes of grease, stale grease, and I reckon he ain't changed his shirt since he left Frisco." "I know he hasn't," I answered. "And I'll bet he sleeps in it," Harrison added. "And you won't lose," I agreed. "The same shirt, and he hasn't had it off once in all this time." But 3 days was all Wolf Larsen allowed him in which to recover from the effects of the beating. On the 4th day, lame and sore, scarcely able to see, so closed were his eyes, he was haled from his bunk by the nape of the neck and set to his duties. He sniffled and wept, but Wolf Larsen was pitiless. "And see that you serve no more slops," was his parting injunction. "No more grease and dirt, mind, and a clean shirt occasionally, or you'll get a toe over the side, understand?" Thomas Mugridge crawled weakly across the galley floor, and a short lurch of the Ghost sent him staggering. In attempting to recover himself, he reached the iron railing which surrounded the stove and kept the pots from sliding off. But he missed the railing, and his hand, with his weight behind it, landed squarely on the hot surface. There was a sizzle, an odor of burning flesh, and a sharp cry of pain. "Oh, God, what have I done?" he wailed, sitting down in the coal box and nursing his new hurt by rocking back and forth. "Why has all this come on me? It makes me fair sick, it does. I try so hard to go through life, armless and nobody." The tears were running down his puffed and discolored cheeks, and his face was drawn with pain. A savage expression flitted across it. Oh, I hate him! Oh, I hate him!" he gritted out. "Whom?" I asked. But the poor wretch was weeping again over his misfortunes. Less difficult it was to guess whom he hated than whom he did not hate, for I had come to see the malignant devil in him, which impelled him to hate all the world. I sometimes thought that he hated even himself, so grotesquely had life dealt with him, and so monstrously. At such moments, a great sympathy welled up within me, and I felt shame that I had ever joyed in his discomfort or pain. Life had been unfair to him. It had played him a scurvy trick when it fashioned him into the thing he was, and it played him scurvy tricks ever since. What chance had he to be anything else than he was? And as though answering my unspoken thought, he wailed, "I never had no chance, not 'arf a chance. Who was there to send me to school, or put Tommy in my 'ungry belly, or wipe my bloody nose for me, when I was a kiddie? Who ever did anything for me, eh? Ooh, I see." "Never mind, Tommy," I said, placing a soothing hand on his shoulder. "Cheer up. It'll all come right in the end. You've long years before you, and you can make anything you please of yourself." "It's a lie, a bloody lie," he shouted in my face, flinging off the hand. "It's a lie and you know it. I'm already mawed, and mawed out of leavin's and scraps. It's all right for you, You was born a gentleman. You never knew what it was to go hungry, to cry yourself to sleep with your little belly gnawing and gnawing like a rat inside you. It can't come right. If I was president of the United States tomorrow, how would it fit my belly for one time when I was a kiddie and it went empty? Oh, could it, I say? I was born to suffering and sorrow. I've had more cruel suffering than any 10 men. I've been in hospital of my bleeding life. I've had the fever in Aspinwall, in Havana, in New Orleans. I never died of the scurvy and was rotten with 6 months in Barbados, smallpox in Honolulu, 2 broken legs in Shanghai, pneumonia in Unalaska, 3 busted ribs, and my insides all twisted in Frisco. And here I am now. Look at me. Look at me. My ribs kick loose from my back again. I'll be coughing blood before 8 bells. How can it be made up to me, I ask? Who's going to do it? God? Oh, God must have hated me when he signed me on for a voyage in this bloomin' world of his. The tirade against destiny went on for an hour or more, and then he buckled to his work, limping and groaning, and in his eyes a great hatred for all created things. His diagnosis was correct, however, for he was seized with occasional sicknesses during which he vomited blood and suffered great pain. And as he said, it seemed God hated him too much to let him die, for he ultimately grew better and waxed more malignant than ever. Several days more passed before Johnson crawled on deck and went about his work in a half-hearted way. He was still a sick man, and I more than once observed him creeping painfully aloft to a topsail or drooping wearily as he stood at the wheel. But still worse, it seemed that his spirit was broken. He was abject before Wolf Larsen and almost groveled to Johansen. Not so with the conduct of Leach. He went about the deck like a tiger cub, glaring his hatred openly at Wolf Larsen and Johansen. "I'll do for you yet, you slab-foot Swede," I heard him say to Johansen one night on deck. The mate cursed him in the darkness, and the next moment some missile struck the galley a sharp rap. There was more cursing and a mocking laugh, and when all was quiet I stole outside and found a heavy knife embedded over an inch in the solid wood. A few minutes later the mate came fumbling about in search of it, but I returned it privily to Leach next day. He grinned when I handed it over, yet it was a grin that contained more sincere thanks than a multitude of verbosities of speech common to the members of my own class. Unlike anyone else in the ship's company, I now found myself with no quarrels on my hand, and in the good graces of all. The hunters possibly no more than tolerated me, though none of them disliked me, while Smoke and Henderson convalescent under a deck awning and swinging day and night. in their hammocks assured me that I was better than any hospital nurse, and they would not forget me at the end of the voyage when they were paid off, as though I stood in need of their money, I who could have bought them out bag and baggage and the schooner and its equipment a score of times over. But upon me had devolved the task of tending their wounds and pulling them through. I did my best by them. Wolf Larsen underwent another attack of headache, which lasted 2 days. He must have suffered severely, for he called me in and obeyed my commands like a sick child. But nothing I could do seemed to relieve him. At my suggestion, however, he gave up smoking and drinking, though why such a magnificent animal as he should have headaches at all puzzles me. "'Tis the hand of God, I'm telling you," is the way Lewis sees it. "'Tis a visitation for his black-hearted deeds, and there's more behind and coming, or else." "Or else," I prompted. "God is nodding and not doing his duty, though it's me as shouldn't say it. I was mistaken when I said that I was in the good graces of all. Not only does Thomas Mugridge continue to hate me, but he has discovered a new reason for hating me. It took me no little while to puzzle it out, but I finally discovered that it was because I was more lucky born than he. Gentleman born, he put it. And still no more dead men," I twitted Lewis, when Smoke and Henderson, side by side in friendly conversation, took their first exercise on deck. Lewis surveyed me with his shrewd gray eyes and shook his head portentously. "She's a-comin', I tell you, and it'll be sheets and halyards. Stand by, all hands, when she begins to howl. I've had the feel of it this long time, and I can now feel it now as plainly as I feel the rigging of a dark night. She's close. She's close. Who goes first?" I queried. "Not old fat Lewis, I promise you," he laughed. "For 'tis the bones of me know that come this next year I'll be gazing in the old mother's eyes, weary with watching of the sea, and for the 5 sons she gave to it." "What's he been saying to you?" Tommy Mugridge demanded a moment later. "That he's going home some day to see his mother," I answered diplomatically. "I never 'ad none," was the Cockney's comment, as he gazed with lustreless, hopeless eyes into mine. Chapter 14. It has dawned upon me that I never placed a proper valuation upon womankind. For that matter, though not amative to any considerable degree so far as I have discovered, I was never outside the atmosphere of women until now. My mother and sisters were always about me, and I was always trying to escape them, for they worried me to distraction with their solicitude for my health and with their periodic inroads on my den when my orderly confusion, upon which I prided myself, was turned into worse confusion and less order. Though it looked neat enough to the eye, I never could find anything when they had departed. But now, alas, how welcome would have been the feel of their presence, the frou-frou and swish-swish of their skirts, which I had so cordially detested. I am sure, if I ever get home, that I shall never be irritable with them again. They may dose me and doctor me morning, noon, and night, and dust and sweep and put my den to rights every minute of the day, and I shall only lean back and survey it all and be thankful that I am possessed of a mother and some several sisters. All of which has set me wondering, where are the mothers of these 20 and odd men on the Ghost? It strikes me as unnatural and unhealthful that men should be totally separated from women and herd through the world by themselves. Coarseness and savagery are the inevitable results. These men about me should have wives and sisters and daughters. Then would they be capable of softness and tenderness and sympathy. As it is, not one of them is married. In years and years, not one of them has been in contact with a good woman, or within the influence or redemption which irresistibly radiates from such a creature. There is no balance in their lives. Their masculinity, which in itself is of the brute, has been overdeveloped. The other and spiritual side of their natures has been dwarfed, atrophied in fact. They are a company of celibates, grinding harshly against one another and growing daily more calloused from the grinding. It seems to me impossible sometimes that they ever had mothers. It would appear that they are a half-brute, half-human species, a race apart, wherein there is no such thing as sex, that they are hatched out by the sun like turtle eggs, or receive life in some similar and sordid fashion, and that all their days they fester in brutality and viciousness, and in the end die, as unlovely as they have lived. Rendered curious by this new direction of ideas, I talked with Johansson last night. The first superfluous words with which he has favored me since the voyage began. He left Sweden when he was 18, is now 38, and in all the intervening time has not been home once. He had met a townsman a couple of years before in some sailor boarding house in Chile, so that he knew his mother to be still alive. "She must be pretty old now," he said, staring meditatively into the binnacle and then jerking a sharp glance at Harrison, who was staring a point off the course. "When did you last write her?" He performed his mental arithmetic aloud. 81. No, 82. No, 83. Yes, 83, 10 years ago. From some little point in Madagascar. I was trading. "You see," he went on, as though addressing his neglected mother across half the girth of the earth, "each year I was going home. So what was the good to write? It was only a year, and each year something happened. I didn't go. But I am mate now, and when I pay off at Frisco, maybe with $500, I will ship myself on a windjammer round the Horn to Liverpool, which will give me more money. Then I will pay my passage from there home. Then she will not do any more work." "But does she work now? How old is she?" About 70, he answered, and then boastingly, "We work from the time we are born until we die in my country. That's why we live so long. I will live to 100. I shall never forget this conversation. The words were the last I ever heard him utter. Perhaps they were the last he did utter, too, for going down into the cabin to turn in, I decided it was too stuffy to sleep below. It was a calm night. We were out of the trades, and the Ghost was forging ahead barely an hour, so I tucked a blanket and pillow under my arm and went up on deck. As I passed between Harrison and the binnacle, which was built into the top of the cabin, I noticed he was this time fully 3 points off, thinking that he was asleep and wishing him to escape reprimand or worse. I spoke to him, but he was not asleep. His eyes were wide and staring. He seemed greatly perturbed, unable to reply to me. "What's the matter?" I asked. "Are you sick?" He shook his head, and with a deep sign as of awakening, caught his breath. "You better get on your course then," I chided. He put a few spokes over, and I watched the compass card swing slowly to NNW and steady itself with slight oscillations. I took a fresh hold on my bedclothes and was preparing to start on when some movement caught my eye, and I looked astern to the rail. A sinewy hand, dripping with water, was clutching the rail. A second hand took from in the darkness beside it. I watched, fascinated. What visitant from the gloom of the deep was I to behold? Whatever it was, I knew that it was climbing aboard by the long line. I saw a head, the hair wet and straight, shape itself, and then the unmistakable eyes and face of Wolf Larsen. His right cheek was red with blood, which flowed from some wound in the head. He drew himself inboard with a quick effort and arose to his feet, glancing swiftly as he did so at the man at the wheel, as though to assure himself of his identity and that there was nothing to fear from him. The sea water was streaming from him. It made little audible gurgles which distracted me. As he stepped toward me, I shrank back instinctively, for I saw that in his eyes, which spelled death. "All right, Hump," he said in a low voice. "Where's the mate?" I shook my head. "Johansson," he said softly. "Johansson." "Where is he?" demanded of Harrison. The young fellow seemed to have recovered his composure, for he answered steadily enough. "I don't know, sir. I saw him go forward a little while ago." "So did I go forward? But you will observe that I didn't come back the way I went. Can you explain it?" "You must have been overboard, sir." "Shall I look for him in the steerage, sir?" I asked. Wolf Larsen shook his head. "You wouldn't find him, Humph. But you'll do. Come on. Never mind your bleeding. Leave it where it is." I followed his heels. There was nothing stirring amidships. "Those cursed hunters," was his comment. "Too damn fat and lazy to stand a 4-hour watch." But on the forecastle head we found 3 sailors asleep. He turned them over and looked at their faces. They composed the watch on deck, and it was the ship's custom in good weather to let the watch sleep, with the exception of the officer, the helmsman, and the lookout. "Who's lookout?" he demanded. "Me, sir," answered Holyoke, one of the deep-water sailors, a slight tremor in his voice. "I went off just this very minute, sir. I'm sorry, sir. Won't happen again." "Did you hear or see anything on deck?" "No, sir, But Wolf Larsen had turned away with a snort of disgust, leaving the sailor rubbing his eyes with surprise at having been let off so easy. "Softly now," Wolf Larsen warned me in a whisper, as he doubled his body into the forecastle scuttle and prepared to descend. I followed with a quaking heart. What was to happen I knew no more than did I know what had happened, but blood had been shed, and it was through no whim of Wolf Larsen that he had gone over to the side with his scalp laid open. Besides, Johansson was missing. It was my first descent into the forecastle, and I shall not soon forget my impression of it, caught as I stood on my feet at the bottom of the ladder, built directly in the eyes of the schooner. It was of the shape of a triangle, along the 3 sides of which stood the bunks. In double tier, 12 of them. It was no larger than a hall bedroom in Grub Street, and yet 12 men were herded into it to eat and sleep and carry on all the functions of living. My bedroom at home was not large, yet it could have contained a dozen similar forecastles, and taking into consideration the height of the ceiling, a score at least. It smelled sour and musty, and by the dim light of the swinging sea lamp, I saw every bit of available wall space hung deep with sea boots, oilskins, and garments clean and dirty of various sorts. These swung back and forth with every roll of the vessel, giving rise to a brushing sound, as of trees against a roof or wall. Somewhere a boot thumped loudly, and at irregular intervals against the wall, and though it was a mild night on the sea, there was a continual chorus of the creaking timbers and bulkheads, and of abysmal noises beneath the flooring. The sleepers did not mind. There were 8 of them. The 2 watches below, and the air was thick with warmth and odor of their breathing, and the air was filled with the noise of their snoring and of their sighs and half-groans, tokens plan of the rest of the animal man. But were they sleeping, all of them, or had they been sleeping? This was evidently Wolf Larsen's quest, to find the man who appeared to be asleep and who were not asleep and who had not been asleep very recently. And he went about in a way that reminded me of a story out of Boccaccio. He took the sea lamp from its swinging frame and handed it to me. He began at the first bunks forward on the starboard side. In the top one day, Ufti Ufti, a Kanaka and splendid seaman, so named by his mates, he was asleep on his back and breathing as placidly as a woman. One arm was under his head, the other lay on top of the blankets. Wolf Larsen put thumb and forefinger to the wrist and counted the pulse. In the midst of it, the Kanaka roused. He woke as gently as he slept. There was no movement of the body whatsoever. The eyes only moved. They flashed wide open, big and black, and stared, unblinking, into our faces. Wolf Larsen put his finger to his lips as to sign for silence, and the eyes closed again. In the lower bunk lay Louis, grossly fat and warm and sweaty, asleep unfeignedly and sleeping laboriously. While Wolf Larsen held his wrist, he stirred uneasily, bowing his body so that for a moment it rested on shoulders and heels. His lips moved, and he gave voice to this enigmatic utterance. "A shilling's worth a quarter, but keep your lamps out. For the threepenny bits, or the publicans, I'll shove 'em on you for sixpence." Then he rolled over on his side with a heavy, sobbing sigh, saying, "A sixpence is a tanner, and a shilling a bob. But what a pony is, I don't know." Satisfied with the honesty of this and the Kanaka's sleep, Wolf Larsen passed on to the next two bunks on the starboard side, occupied top and bottom, as we saw the light of the sea lamp by Leach and Johnson. As Wolf Larsen bent down to lower bunk to take Johnson's pulse, I, standing erect and holding the lamp, saw Leach's head rise stealthily as he peered over the side of his bunk to see what was going on. He must have divined Wolf Larsen's trick and the sureness of direction, for the light was at once dashed from my hand, and the forecastle was left in the darkness. He must have leaped also at the same instant, straight down on Wolf Larsen. The first sounds were those of a conflict between a bull and a wolf. I heard a great infuriated bellow go up from Wolf Larsen, and from Leach snarling that was desperate and blood-curdling. Johnson must have joined him immediately, so that his abject and groveling conduct on deck for the past few days had been no more than planned deception. I was so terror-stricken by this fight in the dark that I leaned against the ladder, trembling and unable to ascend, and upon me was that old sickness at the pit of the stomach, caused always by the spectacle of physical violence. In this instance I could not see, but I could hear the impact of the blows, the soft crushing sound made by flesh striking forcibly against flesh. Then there was the crashing about of the entwined bodies, the labored breathing, the short, quick gasps of sudden pain. There must have been more men in the conspiracy to murder the captain and mate, for by the sounds I knew that Leach and Johnson had been quickly reinforced by some of their mates. "Get a knife, somebody!" Leach was shouting. "Pound him on the head! Mash his brains out!" was Johnson's cry. But after his first bellow, Wolf Larsen made no noise. He was fighting grimly and silently for life. He was sore beset. Down at the very first, he had been unable to gain his feet, and for all of his tremendous strength, I felt that there was no hope for him. The force with which they struggled was vividly impressed on me, for I was knocked down by their surging bodies and badly bruised. But, in the confusion, I managed to crawl into an empty lower bunk out of the way. "All hands, we've got him, I could hear Leach crying. "Who?" demanded those who had been really asleep and who had wakened to they knew not what. "It's the bloody mate," was Leach's crafty answer, strained from him in a smothered sort of way. This was greeted with whoops of joy, and from then on Wolf Larsen had 7 strong men on top of him, Lewis, I believe, taking no part in it. The forecastle was like an angry hive of bees aroused by some marauder. "What ho! Below there," I heard Latimer shout down the scuttle, too cautious to descend into the inferno of passion he could hear raging beneath him in the darkness. "Won't somebody get a knife? Oh, won't somebody get a knife?" Leach pleaded in the first interval of comparative silence. The number of assailants was a cause of confusion. They blocked their own efforts, while Wolf Larsen, with but a single purpose, achieved this. This was to fight his way across the floor to the ladder. Though in total darkness, I followed his progress by its sound. No man less than a giant could have done what he did once he had gained the foot of the ladder. Step by step, by the might of his arms, the whole pack of men striving to drag him back and down, he drew his body up from the floor till he stood erect. And then, step by step, hand and foot, he slowly struggled up the ladder. The very last of all I saw, for Latimer, having finally gone for a lantern, held it so that its light shone down the scuttle. Wolf Larsen was nearly to the top, though I could not see him. All that was visible was the mass of men fastened upon him. It squirmed about like a huge, many-legged spider and swayed back and forth to the regular roll of the vessel. And still, step by step, with long intervals between, the mass ascended. Once it tottered about to fall back, but the broken hold was regained, and it still went up. "Who was it?" Latimer cried. In the rays of the lantern, I could see his perplexed face peering down. "Larsen," I heard a muffled voice from within the mass. Latimer reached down with his free hand. I saw a hand shoot up to clasp his. Then Latimer pulled, and the next couple of steps were made with a rush. Then Wolf Larsen's other hand reached up and clutched the end of the scuttle. The mass swung clear of the ladder, and the men, still clinging to their escaping foe, they began to drop off, to be bruised off against the sharp edge of the scuttle, to be knocked off by the legs which were now kicking powerfully. Leach was the last to go, falling sheer back from the top of the scuttle and striking on the head and shoulders upon his sprawling mates beneath. Wolf Larsen and the lantern disappeared, and we were left in darkness.